Story 1. As a general rule, I'm typically against laws that restrict liberties as a preventative measure. Governments acquire power. They never, ever cede that power back to the people voluntarily. I kind of look at it like a zip tie or a ratcheting mechanism. Sure, you can go one click at a time, and it'll take you a long time before those cuffs are cutting off circulation to the point where your hands are turning purple. But whether it's all at once, or one click once a week for 100,000 weeks, it only ever gets tighter, never gets looser. That being said, I think if we're concerned about teens using social media, the onus should be on their parents to parent their children and set the parameters that are best for their children. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that argument, but given that the government isn't liable if I ever fuck up raising my kid, and that responsibility and burden sits squarely on my shoulders, I think it's only fair that I should be the one responsible for raising my kid.
I mean, ultimately, parents aren't that liable for fucking up their kids. But you have a great point. If you don't want your kids on social media, your devices should have the proper controls, and they should be enabled by default. That would probably help keep the boomers off social media as well.
I know plenty of 20 and 30-year-olds who aren't doing themselves or the world any favors by being online either. Let's not pretend like the internet is a detriment to everybody but me, and everybody but me is a detriment to the internet. Or my age group.
Story 2. It's just an excuse to make the internet less anonymous for everybody. It's not about the kids.
Banning kids under 16 is just going to push them to sketchier corners of the internet. If you want more privacy invasions, sure, go ahead. But don't pretend it's about safety when it's about surveillance. LOL.
Chuckles, and it stops no one. Onion routing was a thing when I was 13, so even when my dad set limits on what time the internet could be accessed through our internet service provider, I got around it.
I'm not willing to sacrifice my internet anonymity, but I also believe there needs to be a way to keep kids away from porn and other adult content. Won't somebody please think of the children? I don't even have kids, so I guess ultimately, not my problem, but it's scary how places like Reddit normalize porn consumption, and there are plenty of youngsters on this platform. Take a look at her comics, for example. Several of the top posts are just lust-provoking art trying to get you to pay for porn. Haha.
Story 3. I know a lot of people are all for this, but I probably would have committed suicide as a teenager if I hadn't had access to the internet. I lived in a rural area. I didn't have a single friend. My dad was violent and abusive, and my mom kissed his ass. I was wildly depressed and lonely, and didn't have a single person to turn to for help. I had no idea how to socialize or what music or TV shows or anything that people my age were into, because nobody ever talked to me unless it was to let me know that nobody likes me and I should kill myself. We got internet when I was around 14, and I was able to talk to other people my age and actually practice social interaction a little bit. I was able to see people referencing artists and movies, so I'd know that those were things to check out. That way, I could actually hold a conversation without sounding like I'd lived under a rock, because I basically had. I'm not saying the internet is harmless and that there aren't bad things online. I understand that just because I didn't experience the dark side of the internet doesn't mean there isn't evil shit out there. All I'm saying is that for some teens, it's also an escape from a really hellish life, and I probably wouldn't be here had I not had that escape.
I'm not gonna lie. Whenever people rant about how bad social media is, I'm just thinking about myself, who uses it as a form of escapism like I'm doing right now. Technically speaking, I shouldn't even be here. I've learned about a lot of stuff that my parents would never teach me, and found people who share common interests.
It's especially important for young LGBTQ plus people. When I was younger, I was in a group chat with loads of young people who had bigoted parents and were bullied ruthlessly in school just for being themselves. Why do they deserve to have their only safe space taken away from them?
I'm autistic, and I grew up in a hamlet of around 120 people. None of the other children liked me. If it wasn't for the internet, I'd only have my parents to talk to from age 11 to 18.
Story 4. Any law that makes something fully illegal, and then you wake up one day, turn 16, 18, 21, or whatever age, and it's suddenly fully legal, is always going to be a problem. Separately, parents need to parent, but the government should be able to step in when parents are not doing that, including with the internet and social media, parents profiting off their child on social media, documenting all of the child's personal life moments, and so on.
Like you get on at 18, don't know what you're doing, then get hacked, and lose your identity or a bunch of money.
Story 5. It's used as an excuse to collect data. Bad idea anyway, because it cuts kids off from resources they often can't get in real life, like LGBTQ resources, other political views, and sources of information that aren't their parents or their parents' friends. Story 6. I'm strongly against it. It's just a way to gradually normalize the government controlling who can see what on the internet.
That, and honestly, it doesn't help. We need minors to receive better parenting and education about the internet. Age verification crap just makes them fall victim to whatever shit. Either one, without their parents knowing, or two, the very day they are old enough to make decisions alone. Because laws to protect kids don't create people who know how to protect themselves from scams, malware, or exploitation.
This is my take. It keeps them in a bubble, away from opinions that conflict with those they've been indoctrinated with.
That, and it coddles parents who won't discipline their kids. Oh, that's okay. The government will do it for me.
Story 7. We need to reform social media instead. It has the potential to be a force for good, but many platforms have been designed to be harmful just because that makes money. Adults are at risk from this just the same as kids are.
I also think that it's just how those billionaires think human interaction works. That was my first thought after watching The Social Network. It also reinforces the way they want culture to be shaped. We know how healthy interaction works. If we had a popular platform that facilitated that kind of communication, things could actually improve.
It is a force for good. I'm only getting treatment for my disability because I was able to find information through other disabled people online. I know people blame social media for all the Nazi shit going on now, but there was no social media in the 1930s.
Story 8. Opposed. Not because I don't think it's a good idea, but I don't like the government having that kind of censorship power. Story 9. I think we should teach teens how to use it properly and be nice to each other. If people are banned until 16, then once they turn 16, they'll start acting like lunatics because nobody taught them the inner workings of social media. My position here is similar to the phone ban across the United States. You can't teach people how to use the thing right if they aren't allowed to have the thing in the first place. That's like telling someone who's bad at dribbling or handling a basketball that they can't practice dribbling until they handle the ball responsibly. Generally, 16, if not before, is the age when teens are able to drive. Is social media really as risky and hard to teach as driving? Because you're not actively risking your and other people's lives by logging on to social media. You are once you start driving that car. Story 10. Idiotic, frankly. I don't want to have to scan my ID to prove I'm not a kid. Parents need to be more comfortable buying their kids flip phones that just don't give them unfettered access to everything. What happens when that system collecting ID information gets hacked? And cheaper, less secure businesses are going to pop out in droves to bank on the opportunity. Not to mention a government agency using taxes to kind of protect kids, when kids will just ask for their parents' IDs. I also hate that kid culture has gotten dispersed and morphed into our world. I'm talking Webkinz, Club Penguin, WeWorld, Neopets, and so on. Hannah Montana, Naked Brothers Band, One Direction, Jonas Brothers. Not to mention all of those TV movies like High School Musical, Luck of the Irish, and the rest. They need to have a clear dividing line to best enjoy their childhood. That is something society, culture, and companies can help form, but actual steps need to be taken to create that. Otherwise, they'll just find workarounds to keep going into more adult spaces online. Story 11. I think telling kids that they can't do something will have the opposite of the intended effect. Kids will always find a way to do something they aren't supposed to be doing. Chuckles source. I was a kid once. Story 12. The government needs to do less to parent children and more to support parents of children. Kids spending too much time on social media is just a symptom of overworked parents.
True, but parents would rather put an iPad or phone in front of their kids than raise them, even when they have the time, or use their kids for clout on social media. So the ban is necessary, especially when our governments are run by idiots and pedophiles who cater to the wealthy.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we should not have any laws meant to protect children. For example, labor laws prohibiting people under the age of 14 laws against the sexualization of children, and laws establishing minimum ages for gambling or buying alcohol, just because it's the parents' responsibility to monitor their kids.
Story 13. Don't like it. People of all ages should have access to things like YouTube or Discord, with appropriate limits and regulations to keep mature content from people who are most likely not a suitable audience for such. Story 14. I would be for it in principle, but I understand it would be completely impractical to actually enforce without some very concerning privacy violations. You'd be better off banning smartphones for kids under 16. They can still have a flip phone and access to the internet via a home computer. Story 15. No, you do not want to give the government any more power than it already has to dictate what you can and cannot do with your own life. Story 16. How do you feel about sending Reddit your ID? Teen social media is the new child pornography. It's a useful excuse to do shitty, privacy-reducing things to the internet. I know a family that bans their kids from owning a phone until they're 18. I don't know what they do about other electronics, but however they handle it, they at least partially solve the issue for their house in a way that doesn't impact me. This generation of parents doesn't need to offload their problems onto the population at large. They need to choose what's right for their family and do it. It's hard work, and I didn't do a great job of it always, but we figured it out, and my kids aren't social media junkies. And we weren't equipped with half the information and tooling available now. Story 17. Nah, it takes freedoms away. Parents can do that if they choose. Let's make rich perverts fix their shit. Story 18. I prefer a law against algorithms that make humans dumb, for example, interest-based scrolling. Story 19. The issue isn't banning social media, but the enforcement of the law. It's a slippery slope of digital IDs and user tracking that erodes privacy. It's definitely a boiling frog type moment that seems useful initially, but ends in us needing to upload our passports to post Reddit comments. Story 20. 1. Impossible to enforce. 2. Be a better parent, coming from someone with 2 daughters. Story 21. Stupid. Kids will get around it and then be completely unaware of how to use it when they come of age. And it's far too useful. When does it stop counting as social media? Does a forum for a game count? Either online or, say, football, either flavor, something for tech support on a computer or homework. Story 22. Logistically, I think it's a bad idea. The only way to really enforce it would be for companies to require identification of some sort. Not everybody has a camera on their device for facial recognition, which is also unreliable and completely disregards privacy. And not everybody has an ID. People, often underprivileged, would basically be shut out of online participation regardless of their age. Enforcement would also create a very dangerous surveillance infrastructure. Parents and educators should step up and moderate their children's internet usage. Yes, I say this as a parent. Story 23. It's such a bad idea. What exactly is the problem and how is it solved by a ban? Where did that magic number, 16, come from? What is even considered social media? Has any consideration been made about what social media companies will do to avoid such bans? And besides all these issues, how will it be enforced? If anything, it creates a generation of people who are even better at avoiding being tracked online. I don't think the people who come up with this lazy sort of legislation have any clue at all about what beast they are dealing with. Story 24. To be honest, I think this would help kids' mental health, critical thinking skills, and education. Story 25. Serious, there is no actual motivation to protect kids. It's a smokescreen to justify the removal of anonymity and increase control over the population to stifle dissent and political upheaval. Story 26. How are teens under 16 supposed to communicate with each other? And don't give that go outside crap. It's not the 80s anymore. The places to hang out outside are constantly reducing for teenagers. Story 27. The only issue with that is they'll have everyone show proof of age, which they're already doing with Discord. YouTube is using AI to detect underage people and hitting them with age verifications. No one wants to give their ID or scan their face.
If my gaming guilds stay on Discord, I plan to Photoshop the name, license number, and other identifying information in a photo of my ID into something made up. I figure their algorithm will look at the date of birth and the overall layout of the card to determine that it's real and ignore everything else. That way, when their data gets hacked, which it will, or seized by one of the alphabet agencies, the only real information they'll get will be my date of birth and state of residence.
Story 28. As a parent, I'm against it. It's my job to raise and protect my child, not a government with an agenda. Story 29. It's not about teens at all, it's about mass surveillance. Everybody should be against it. Story 30. Good in theory, but the only way to enforce it is with IDs, invading people's privacy, and blindly trusting that these companies are telling the truth and that your ID and personal information won't be revealed in a data breach. It's up to the parents to not be shitty parents. These people make the incredibly stupid and selfish decision to have a child just because they want one, even when they aren't even remotely ready or emotionally mature enough, and then proceed to not watch what the kid does online after throwing an iPad in front of them to shut them up. We should honestly start bullying parents into actually being parents and not just giving their child full unsupervised access to the internet the moment they're born. This is an absolutely awful idea in reality because the only way to use social media would be to provide your ID. There wouldn't be any anonymity, and now if you say something the government doesn't like, they have a person to go after. Free speech is already under attack today. This would only enable governments to go further. Story 31. Utterly stupid. Social media is quite literally the only place kids have left to socialize. Shocker. Keeping them out of it is a surefire way to raise a generation of asocials.
Or, would force them to go out and actually socialize.
Unless they live in the backwoods, in the ass end of nowhere, they can figure out ways to socialize. Just like kids did prior to the internet. During the previous 10,000 years of human civilization. See, this is the issue. The internet has become so ubiquitous, no one can fathom life without it.
They do what me and my friends did. Throw barn parties, drink, break shit, do shrooms, drop acid, get arrested. Chuckles, good times, man. Good times.
Story 32. I think this is a general overreaction. I think a better move is to differentiate platforms by the age group and content they're geared toward. I see no problem with platforms for kids to work together on homework or learning, or video games and so on. But I don't think it's safe for people below 16 to use much of any traditional social media. Though I could see some smart utility like a light version of social media open to 14-year-olds with parental consent. Story 33. Maybe if parents weren't sitting on their phones all the time and actually paying attention to their children. Oh, I don't know. Maybe we wouldn't have to worry about some of the real mental health issues that we've been seeing. Story 34. We need to police social media, not ban it for kids. There's zero evidence social media causes mental health problems in kids. Zero. In fact, most kids with mental health problems go to social media for answers, since they are there all the time anyway. We need to make sure the content they see is correct and helpful. And we need to make sure they know how to get help in real life. Story 35. No, I don't believe in restrictions on things. I believe in accountability and natural consequences. Story 36. Any requirements to provide proof of identity in order to use social media go against freedom of expression. If you don't want your child exposed to the adult world, then don't let them use the internet beyond what you can control yourself. Story 37. It never was about kids. These people just want control, or should I say more? There never will be a limit. Story 38. A universal law that requires adults to prove their identity on any platform that underage users have access to. Story 39. I'd prefer a universal law that you can't have unfettered access to the internet without an IQ test. Story 40. 100% support. Kids have their adult lives ahead to be too online. They should be allowed to grow up without living in this algorithmic hellscape. Social media companies will never self-regulate, so that's the best we can do. Story 41. Father of 3 here. France is pushing a similar law right now with a 15-year age limit. I get the intention, but I'm skeptical about the approach. Every time we ask the government to solve a parenting problem, we end up with more surveillance and less freedom. To enforce age limits online, you need identity verification. That means trusting tech platforms with your kids' personal data, the same platforms that get breached every other month. So you trade one problem for another. Kids on social media versus a massive database of children's identities waiting to get leaked. I'd rather raise my kids to handle the internet than wait for a law to do my job. Set boundaries, stay involved, have uncomfortable conversations. It's harder than voting for a ban, but that's what parenting is. Story 42. How about, instead of restricting access to the things that allow some teens to actually get friends and have fun in this miserable world, we educate people about the internet and social media instead? Story 43. It's not going to work. Kids are smarter and know how to circumvent it easily. Claiming that social media causes mental health issues as the sole reason is alarmist, not actual science or social science. Story 44. Teens will find a way around it, while parents will find other ways to blame social media for ruining their kids. Story 45. I think parenting should be up to the parents, not for me to share proof of identification with a company that will most likely use it to improve my data profile for marketing reasons I don't appreciate. If not, it'll get leaked. I say this because the easiest way to enforce it is to require adults to prove they're old enough, not for those kids to prove they're old enough. There are more of us, yet we have to do the work. Story 46. On the one hand, this could protect teenagers from toxicity and bullying on social media. But on the other hand, it might also limit their access to information, news, and different opinions. I think they'll probably find ways to get around these rules anyway. Story 47. It's mostly just an excuse to collect information about people under the guise of checking age. Pose. Story 48. They have just banned it in Australia. I used to use Snapchat to communicate with my son, FaceTime, a bit of fun with filters and so on. He's 10. I can no longer do that. My question is, why aren't we banning it for adults? What about the sickos that use it to groom younger kids? Why don't we make it safe for kids rather than banning it? Hold the companies accountable for what's on their sites, and parents for what they give their children access to. Story 49. I think the governments should stay out of people's lives and let parents deal with it. Story 50. I think it would require a constitutional amendment in the United States as an exception to abridging the freedom of speech. The applicability of international laws in the United States is still subject to constitutional protections. But aside from that, I would strongly oppose it. There are harms that can result from social media use, but there are also benefits, and I think legally restricting kids from enjoying the benefits because of the risk of harms is morally unjustifiable. Private companies would still be free to restrict people however they want, as long as it did not violate civil rights laws. Also, if enforcement meant requiring even adults to provide proof of identity to access social media, that would also be both legally and morally problematic. Story 51. To be terse, that's fucking stupid. Teens are in their prime for establishing social connections. If you want to guide your teens into healthy socialization, guide them. Story 52. I think we should go a step further and ban the usage of all smart devices until the age of 13.
That would be horrible. I would probably never have kept my sense of curiosity and love for learning if I didn't have smart devices.
Story 53. Old people in power have never understood and always felt the need to ban what entertains young people. As of right now, it would be better to ban baby boomers from having social media and prevent them from sharing fake news and AI slop.
Oh, it's not just the older generation. By no means.
Story 54. Theoretically great. Practically, I can't see it being successful. But what a win for mental health if it works. Story 55. I think we need harsher punishments for the people who expose children. Fines don't work on the wealthy, and they don't go to the people harmed. They need to be given strikes that remove them from power and decimate their wealth in an impactful way that uses the money to do actual good things for the people affected, and jail time should be given more freely. The only thing that affects the wealthy is humiliation, not being able to control their narrative, and losing their luxuries. Bans do not work. There are always ways around them. The adults causing harm must be held accountable in real ways. If anything, the wealthy should suffer harsher punishments for transgressions than less wealthy people, because they had the means to avoid causing harm. Anyone running a company needs to seriously feel the burden of the responsibility they have taken on, so they will do what's right for their employees and consumers. Oh, the inhaler you rush to market for a quick buck gives people chronic obstructive pulmonary disease? You and the board approving it are paying all their medical bills for life, and you're not allowed to work in anything related to pharmaceuticals ever again or to run a business. Your website has hosted a cabal of child predators you have actively protected for years. Your wealth has been seized to fund child therapy, and you're banned from the internet for life. Story 56. How would you implement it? Nope, it would open up mass surveillance and the end of anonymity online. Investing in education is the answer. We would never implement safety mechanisms in guns so that regular citizens could not use them. Face recognition in guns? Instead, we educate people that not everyone has the right to own a gun and that only specialized and trained officials can have one. The law punishes illegal possession of a firearm. Why do we frequently believe that technological fixes, such as banning social media for those under 16, can take the place of social reforms? If your parents gave you a phone number, a smartphone, or a computer without any education and without being educated themselves about it, it's your parents' fault. It's entirely anecdotal, but I've met 12-year-olds who are extremely informed on how the internet operates, even technically speaking, and how to stay safe because someone taught them. Always use ad blockers, pals. In contrast, I have observed fully grown middle-aged adults who are walking hazards while holding a smartphone. There are so many good reforms we can do with technical solutions like limiting digital rights management, breaking monopolies, enforcing regulations such as the Digital Fairness Act, and so on. This is, in my humble opinion, definitely not one of them. Also, let's not forget that age verification companies will have data breaches. They add another level of trust and more attack surface. Why don't we start holding big tech accountable for creating addictive proprietary social media algorithms? Huh? Story 57. The age limit should be 21. If you're not old enough to spend time at the local dive bar, you're not old enough to be on social media. Chuckles, you're less likely to get groomed in the dive bar, frankly. Philosophically, I am in favor. In terms of practicality, however, I would never support it politically. It will be weaponized against free speech. Look at Discord's shitty behavior for a real-world, current example of what I mean. It won't stop with minors. They'll use the precedents set by the law to silence people or track those with unapproved ideas. Story 58. I'd be for it as long as it wasn't down to the government to enforce it and companies weren't liable. Parents should be held accountable. That stops the rest of us from needing to give up our IDs. Story 59. A universal law for the whole world? Or for just one country? Because there's zero chance you're going to get every single place in the world to agree to one thing. Story 60. Who knows that this audience, but so many here chanting about its enforceability, says something. Story 61. If it would actually keep teens off social media, I think it would be a great idea for their mental health and general well-being. But it won't. They'll still be on there, but will be even less likely to reach out for help if they have scary or uncomfortable interactions with adults online. Story 62. It probably would have a massive net positive impact on mental health. But it sounds impossible to enforce. Story 63. Either you enforce it and give companies an excuse for surveillance, or you don't and it does nothing. Story 64. That's bad. It will compromise everyone's privacy and give parents greater control over young teenagers. Story 65. I think it's too little, too late. There are adults who were corrupted ages ago when the internet first started. Story 66. I think it would be better to focus on training strong minds, which would counter the warped ideas coming from it. That is a skill all could use. Those in control either don't want this or don't realize this is the problem. Emphasize, fix the problem, not the symptom. Story 67. My instinct is against these things. They'll find ways around it and maybe be pushed to even shadier parts of the internet. But I do hate social media for the young. Story 68. It won't happen anyway. Too much money is at stake, and no two countries would be able to agree on it. Story 69. Whilst I do not love the idea of a draconian state, given the impact on mental health and the state of social media, full of fake news and hate, I think this is sensible. Story 70. There is evidence that Meta knew it was harmful to teens, especially teen girls, and did nothing. In fact, they doubled down on what they were doing to keep kids on social media. Read The Anxious Generation. It outlines evidence that shows how the mental health of youth took a huge dive in 2013 when social media hit smartphones. It looks like we're starting to treat social media companies now like tobacco companies were treated in the 60s and onwards. Parents have responsibility, yes, but it's a collective action issue. All parties need to push back against the social media companies to help ensure the safety of today's kids. The general thesis of The Anxious Generation is that we overprotected our kids in real life and underprotected them online. Story 71. It's a great idea, but implementation is where it falls down. We need to find a way to implement it without massive privacy issues, and effectively. Story 72. I imagine it would be hard to get widespread support, given the paranoid responses on here. Story 73. For their mental health, yes. But it's the older crowd that the rest of us need to be aware of. Story 74. I don't like the idea of a universal law because I'm concerned about any authority that would have the power to enforce that kind of thing. Story 75. Make it a child endangerment crime with hefty fines, community service, or jail time if their kid gets groomed or they find out who the bully's parents are. Suddenly, all these parents will finally have the energy and means to keep their children safe on the internet. Story 76. It won't work. Kids and adults helping the kids will find a way around it. Thanks to Discord, someone is working on a 3D modeler for the ID or live video scan. It doesn't stop the parents that exploit their children for those family video channels or family blogs. That's incredibly harmful to children, and it's still going on. This has nothing to do with protecting children because otherwise they would be going after the companies doing the addictive scrolling or targeting ads. Story 77. Absolutely not, because then it will require us to provide identification, and I don't need even more companies having access to even more of my information. I'm not worried about the government since they have my info, but this really puts the general public at an even greater risk for data breaches and identity theft. Story 78. I think it should be treated like smoking. Age restricted, only allowed in certain areas that won't harm others, and taxed into oblivion. Story 79. I sit with my kid and go through her social media and digital media. I ask questions and give my opinions. She's receptive and responsive. I prefer this relationship as opposed to regulation. Story 80. Okay, it's the company's problem then. Allow an underage user and fine them a fuckload. But it's the company's problem, not ours. Story 81. Good in theory, but the issue is there's no way it doesn't just make social media a worse and more invasive place for those still allowed on it. I genuinely believe people under 18 don't have any business being on social media, and certainly not talking to people there, but there's no way to get rid of them without impinging on everyone else. Story 82. Limiting is fine, an outright ban is too much. And 16. No need to ban them at that age. Story 83. The internet has always been an insane place where lots of stuff goes unregulated. I don't understand why a filter isn't used instead, like something that could be adjusted by the parents so they know their kids won't check out potentially not safe for work or not safe for life stuff. Kind of like what they had back in school. I think taking the ID of everyone they suspect is underage is wrong because there's not enough information given on what happens to that data afterwards. I'm not against blocking kids from dangerous parts of the internet, but using this as the guise to take their ID is not it. Countries can claim that info gets deleted, but if companies like Discord and YouTube take your ID, there's no guarantee that they actually delete the ID after they check. Who knows how long they store that information for and who else has access? Story 84. Setting aside my opposition to the idea, implementation seems nearly impossible in a way that actually achieves the desired result. As a former kid in the burgeoning internet era, age restrictions were easy as hell to get around, and their mere existence invited challenge. Story 85. How would you enforce that? We can't even enforce a law that bans people from killing each other. Story 86. A blanket ban sounds simple, but it would be hard to enforce and easy to work around. Story 87. I'm for it. Also, I realize this isn't feasible in the real world, but I think you should have to verify your identity on social media accounts. There shouldn't be multiple or anonymous accounts for an individual. There's no need for social media, you can always opt out. But if you want to say or post something, you should own what comes with that. Also, eliminate bots and all the psyop stuff that happens now. The idea that we need anonymous accounts for whistleblowers is outdated, now that social media has largely done more harm than good. Story 88. No social media before 16 is probably a good thing in my book. As a teacher, there's enough bullying at school that's hard to catch. Bullying in the virtual world will just go completely unnoticed. Story 89. I'm totally fine with all social media requiring identification to have an account. It would kill social media, which would be the best thing for society at this point. Story 90. I think it's the absolute best thing that we could do for our country. I'm sorry, but teenagers are pretty stupid, and without Facebook they might actually read. Well, that's too much to ask or watch real news. I asked my 14-year-old niece who the vice president was, who wrote Romeo and Juliet, and what civil rights figure was assassinated in 1968. This is an almost straight-A student, and she couldn't answer any of those questions. Now, to be fair, she did get other questions right, but those three really got to me. I won't go into other examples of why teens today are dumber than at any other time since before the printing press was discovered. There are too many examples, and we'd be here all night. Sorry to all the teenagers if I offended you. Story 91. When I first saw porn on the internet back in 1995-96, all the sites had "you must be 18" warnings, and I'm sure there were many underage users. How are you able to enforce it? Story 92. I think it makes sense, especially given how much crazier social media has gotten. The amount of creeps and scammers. You really need to be at least 16 to handle those situations. Story 93. I believe that first, it's intended to prevent young people from communicating with each other and forming opinions outside the brainwashing they receive at school and from mainstream media. And second, it's an excuse to implement a more extensive surveillance state.
Story 94. Es más fácil poner límites y reglas que educar en lo moral y tener ética. Si la gente tuviese un mínimo de ética en muchos asuntos de su vida, no estaríamos en este tipo de situaciones.
Story 95. I feel like banning teens from social media would never be efficient. There are ways to bypass ID requirements, photo requirements, and age requirements in general. It just doesn't feel right to need to input your ID or show photos of your face simply to use social media. The idea is to moderate certain spaces well enough so that younger people aren't negatively influenced. Story 96. A universal law? Okay, let's think about this logically. If any law is put into effect, and that law covers the whole universe, that would be a law given by the only one who has the authority and right to declare such laws, and that is God. So, if God passed a law stating that those under 16 would be prohibited from social media, I'd think, well, he knows best, so there's obviously a perfectly good reason. And then I'd really enjoy trying to humble them by teasing them relentlessly. Chuckles. What kind of arrogant and ignorant douche canoe would have the audacity to treat every person under 16 the same? Even regardless of age. Every person has strengths and weaknesses. I know many people well into adulthood who shouldn't be on social media, and I know many kids under the age of 16 who have more self-discipline than some adults. If you want to make it ethical and moral, you'd legitimately need to perform routine full psychological examinations to determine the mental and emotional maturity of the person. Plus, you'd really need to understand each person's personality, their individual limits and capabilities, and what specific things that person needs to thrive as well as what they need to avoid. Thus, only God can create and enact universal laws, because only God can be trusted with such laws. Story 97. It would reduce exposure to addiction, bullying, and adult content before kids can handle it. Story 98. 0% chance such a law would be enforceable. Have you met teens? They are tech geniuses. Put a site blocker or parental controls on their phone, they will just find a workaround. Take their phone, a peer will just give them a burner phone. Banning social media for teens will work almost as well as banning vapes for teens. Good luck. Story 99. Man, using the internet already fucking sucks in the United Kingdom. A VPN or virtual private network is essentially required. I've heard some rumors about the United Kingdom government wanting to ban VPNs, which technically doesn't make sense, but maybe they can force United Kingdom VPN providers to require identification. Story 100. I 100% agree that kids should not be on social media. However, I do not believe the law needs to restrict that. That should be on parents. Story 101. We should view social media for pre-adults the same way we view alcohol, cannabis, sex, and graphic violence. Kids are better off not being inundated with it until they know how to manage it intelligently. It's not all just fun and drunken sex games. There are real-world consequences for getting entrenched in social media while kids are still figuring out who they want to be. Story 102. Is there anything to absolve parents from their responsibility to monitor their kids online? Story 103. I think the intentions are good, but I was a teenager once, and if I wanted something and thought the law was dumb, I just find a way to circumvent it, which is infinitely easier when it's digital. Also, keep in mind that repression breeds obsession. Remember prohibition? We already live in a social media-obsessed society, and I think this sort of issue is very nuanced. People smarter than me should really figure out the impacts it will have on the future. More laws are rarely a good solution, and they're sure to backfire. Story 104. It's had a positive effect for a lot of marginalized communities, but on the whole, algorithmic social media has been such a colossally toxic force globally that it should be banned wholesale everywhere at every age. Chronological feeds. Finish. Algorithmic controlled ones are utter poison. Story 105. Recently, there was a story about an 11-year-old kid who killed his adoptive father because the father took away the kid's Nintendo Switch. Every time I hear of the government coming up with laws to prevent kids from accessing social media, I am reminded of stories of kids shooting their parents because the parent took the kid's game away. Story 106. As someone who was 12 on the internet at age 10, I fully support this law. For the next generation, not my past self. Story 107. Yes, please. New generations are so terribly destroyed by social media from 5 years of age or younger. Even early teens. I have so many family members and friends who fell into this trap, putting their kids on social media and devices way too long. As a result, their social skills are tragic. Story 108. Aussies are showing the way. Watch this space as the experiment plays out in real time. 2 months in, and Aussie teens say they have workarounds. Story 109. Even if we ignore the safety concerns of submitting identification online, I fundamentally disagree with the idea. Social media is part of life. Banning kids from accessing it under 16 just means they will not know how to navigate it once the guardrails come off. It's the same as 21-year-olds binging alcohol in college instead of being exposed to it at home in normal quantities between 16 and 19. Social media also has good parts to it. Try being a gay kid in a small town. Connecting with others outside of your bubble is good. Finding others like you, and those who like your hobbies, is good. Finding others with different life experiences is also good. Not having social media at 16 doesn't make your life suddenly la la land. The ways social media is harmful, algorithms, ads, hate groups are also bad for everyone. That shit is what needs to be regulated across the board. Social media is so much different from when I was a child, and I don't think the answer is banning kids from it. It's regulating the fuck out of it. The content shown to you shouldn't be based on how angry it makes you, period. You shouldn't have to scroll past Ozempic ads to see what your friends are up to, period. Story 110. It's unenforceable, and social media and technology are just another part of societal evolution. We need to learn to deal with it instead of just banning it and hiding it away. Story 111. Unenforceable and counterproductive. It would be much more productive and exponentially harder to create a societal climate in which social media is seen as less desirable and even detrimental than what we're doing now. A few vocal people yapping about it doesn't help, especially since today's kids are first and foremost tomorrow's consumers in the minds of the people who create and promote social media. Story 112. There haven't been too many good ripple effects from social media, lots of negative ripples, though. I could see it being a good thing. Story 113. Absolutely. I agree with the law. The next law should ban people over 16 from using it as well. Story 114. On one side, it should be applied to each and every country in the world, but on the other hand, how can they even enforce that rule? Every kid nowadays takes their parents' phones and uses their social media accounts. It's nearly impossible to enforce that rule. Story 115. I disagree. Don't ban its use. Force producers to release a product with fewer algorithms and put more controls on them. The issues with social media are the producer's responsibility, not the customers or users. Story 116. I 100% support this. I really think it screwed up us millennials and Gen Zers. I have no regrets. I had fun. I loved the early days of social media. At the end of the day, when you're on your deathbed, are you going to be happy you spent years staring at a screen when you could have been traveling, cooking, and connecting with real people? Story 117. A big problem would be that the rules could be cheated, and under 16s could still use social media one way or another. But then content and other users would be aimed at over 16s, despite there still being kids on there. It's a dangerous implementation of rules. Personally, I think parents have to monitor what their kids access and how. Story 118. Honestly, I go back and forth on this. Part of me thinks absolutely yes, because social media genuinely messed me up as a teenager, and I didn't even have TikTok. But the other part knows that banning it just makes it more appealing. I think the real answer is better digital literacy education starting young and giving parents actual tools to manage it. Because a blanket ban will just push kids to find workarounds, and then they'll be on it with zero guidance, which is arguably worse. Story 119. 1. A more effective law for society would be to ban people over 50 from using it. 2. One of the problems with social media for kids is that the internet is written in ink. Most people had the chance to reinvent themselves growing up, when they went to college, moved towns, or changed jobs. Young people today don't have that luxury, as their social media is a permanent record. Easily searchable. Being able to reinvent yourself allows you to shed past mistakes, relationships that didn't work, bad experiences, shame, failure, and not have it on your shoulders like a burden forever. Social media is a shackle that some people need to escape from. Story 120. No. We would have no social media literacy when they get it, and as such it would be a horrible idea. It would be like giving a 16-year-old cocaine and getting them addicted in one shot, while also dropping them into a very unsafe neighborhood. Instead, we need to teach social media literacy. Explain how addictive it can be and how it is addictive. Teach them the pitfalls and ensure they know what to expect. You can limit it, but banning it wouldn't work anyway. Parents would still make accounts for them, but prevent photos on it. This is also a non-issue if you parent well. And if you aren't a parent, you should not be worried about this. Story 121. I don't really care, as long as it's the responsibility of the parents to keep their own kids from violating the rules, and they don't require the rest of us to verify our age. Story 122. Great idea. I would only allow YouTube, though. The biggest problem with teens today is that their attention span has been completely destroyed by social media. Many teens just don't take the time to read books or study material. They almost always want the quick and easy solution. In fact, I would go further and ban teens from using AI like ChatGPT. Not long ago, in my country's equivalent of college, I took a course where the teacher was very serious about banning laptops and smartphones from his lessons. You could have them in your bag, but you just couldn't take them out during his lessons. He would give us his presentations, ask us various questions, and so on. We would do the assignment, which was just collecting information about what we had discussed during lessons at home. The result was that everyone paid attention. In fact, my school allows any student to view how many students pass or fail an exam, and every single student who took that course passed. It was very different from other college courses where students are allowed to use smartphones and laptops, and barely 60% of all students pass the first attempt at exams. Story 123. Great idea. Social media can really affect the mind, especially young people's minds, and be genuinely traumatic. I remember being an insecure young teen and finding older men online to keep me company. It definitely still affects me to this day, and it isn't taken as seriously as it should be because it's just online. Story 124. It's not any of our business to dictate what teens can or can't do in other parts of the universe. Story 125. No, we should ban social media altogether. It has been nothing but trouble so far. Story 126. I'm for it. I'd support a universal law banning social media for teens under 16, not because I think teens are bad, but because social media platforms are very obviously built to be addictive, emotionally manipulative, and way too powerful for developing brains. See how us adults are addicted to it. We're basically handing kids a 24/7 machine for comparison, bullying, attention addiction, and algorithm-fed anxiety, and then acting shocked when their mental health takes a hit. But sure, let's keep pretending the problem is just screen time and not billion-dollar companies' engineering obsession. And before people say, teens need social media to stay connected, they'll survive. Humanity somehow maintained friendships before disappearing messages, thirst traps, and comment sections full of strangers with Wi-Fi and unresolved trauma. I'm not saying the law would be easy to enforce because parents, fake ages, loopholes, and so on, but I absolutely support the idea behind it. If we regulate things that can harm kids, then maybe we should regulate platforms designed to hijack their attention and self-worth too. So yes, ban it under 16. Let them be bored, awkward, and normal in real life for a few more years. Character development won't kill them, but TikTok at 12 just might emotionally exhaust them early. Story 127. It will only be half effective, but yet again we have public service announcements discouraging gifting pets as holiday gifts. Maybe curtailing mindless phone sales without a valid reason would curtail the numbers further, but we wonder. Story 128. Fuck it. Ban the internet. The internet has done more harm to society than any other invention, and it's only going to get worse with the rise of AI. The only way to stop it is to burn it to the ground. Story 129. I'm sympathetic to the idea, but it would be insanely difficult to enforce, and the measures for doing so would further erode the privacy of adults. Story 130. I had to think about something my best friend wrote on Blue Sky. She is trans, and she said that for many trans kids, social media is the only safe space at this point. Story 131. I don't think it's acceptable to pull something like this away without replacing it with something. My generation didn't have social media, but we had both freedom and access to facilities that the current generation does not. This ban is about adults being too lazy and incompetent to parent their children, so they make the state do it for them. Pretty shitty, in my opinion. Story 132. Dumb idea with an even worse execution somehow. Why should teens be banned from social media? Can be harmful, but that's what parenting is for. Parents should set restrictions, not the government. Story 133. Government should not be parenting people's kids. It's not their job, and it just encourages people to be lazy parents. Story 134. As someone that's been on the internet since my early 20s, I'm all for it. The internet is not a place for kids. It doesn't matter the safety features. Kids are smarter with tech than most adults. I remember my sister-in-law saying her daughter ain't gonna have no MySpace. I know, I dated myself. She walked out of the room, and I turned to her daughter and asked if she had one. She held up 2 fingers. I'm not saying kids can't get on the internet, but parents need to fucking parent their kids. I don't have kids, but I'd never hand them a tablet and say, entertain yourself, daddy's busy. I see so many kids at the grocery store, eyes glazed over, looking at mom's phone or a tablet. Fucking depressing. Story 135. As someone who grew up on the internet, there were way too many things I found early on that I shouldn't have. I support this in theory, but I don't trust the government to properly enforce it in an effective manner. Plus, this would never work in execution to begin with. Story 136. Absolutely against it. Not because I want minors on social media, but because I don't like the idea of giving government ID to these social media companies for age verification, nor do I want to do the silly AI age verification. Some of you all are way too comfortable with the idea of living in a surveillance state. Story 137. 1. What would that truly accomplish? Nothing, except for data collectors and governments being able to have complete documentation and tracking of the next generation of adults. That's the true goal. 2. If you're arguing social media causes societal harm, I tend to agree, but the harm it causes is just as prevalent in all age groups, even more so in senior age groups. And if you were to ban it, it should be removed completely. Unnecessary. Educate yourself on the risks, limit your exposure, educate your elderly parents on the risks, parent your own kids, stay involved, stay vigilant. Keep it moving. Story 138. Teens are humans too. Do they need to be parented? Yes. Strong by parents. /strong. I don't think these laws will bring any actual benefits to anyone other than power-hungry politicians and the oligarchs behind them. Story 139. It makes as much sense as banning them from porn sites, and it will be just as impossible to implement. Story 140. Basically, it's impossible to actually enforce without compromising the anonymity and freedom of everyone online. Story 141. Number 1. Impossible to enforce without basically a surveillance state. I don't want to give the government that kind of power. Number 2. Tech companies can't be trusted with a password. I'm not about to give them my personal data. Number 3. As someone who had basically unregulated access to the internet as a teenager, that access saved my life. I was going through some rough stuff in my early teenage years, and being able to talk to people anonymously about it, without worrying about my parents seeing what I was up to, saved my life. I wouldn't have made it to 16 without access to the wider internet, and I think that's something that isn't talked about enough in these conversations. Giving kids the chance to figure stuff out without worrying about getting in trouble for it is important, especially for kids who don't have adults in their lives they can trust. Think about the gay kids with homophobic parents, or kids with abusive families who don't have a safe place in their real lives to turn to. Anonymous spaces on the internet are important for those kids. What we really should be doing is improving both computer and online safety education in schools at an earlier age. If they can spend a ridiculous amount of time telling us about cigarettes, they can spare a few hours for things like, whatever you do, do not put personal information online. You can have online friends, but they can be liars, so be careful. And this is what consent is. Don't let adults on the internet or in your real life take advantage of you. They don't really care about you if they treat you like that. That kind of stuff. This removes the responsibility from companies, while also making sure kids who don't have great adults in their lives can learn the stuff they need to learn. Story 142. It would be great if the law held parents and kids accountable, not the websites. Story 143. I love it, but how do you enforce it? Back when there was an age restriction for certain things on the internet, we would just lie about our age. Chuckles. Story 144. The intention behind this idea is good, protecting teens from the mental health impacts of social media. But enforcement would be nearly impossible, and it could push kids to use less regulated platforms instead. I think a better approach would be teaching digital literacy and critical thinking skills, while holding platforms accountable for their algorithms that promote harmful content. What we really need is a cultural shift in how we approach these tools. Story 145. I think it would be about as effective as the already existing one saying they're not allowed to look at porn. Story 146. Honestly, I think 16 is arbitrary. The problem isn't the age. It's the design of these platforms themselves. They're built to be addictive for everyone. Maybe we should focus on regulating how social media companies can use engagement algorithms rather than just banning an age group. Story 147. I think that's exactly what's needed. I'm terrified for my kids. That being said, they always find a way to do what they want. Now we have parental controls. If they're sneaking it somehow, we'll have no control. And how would age be verified without allowing someone to fake their age? I love the idea, but I'm also torn.